Welcome to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.
Hi, I'm David Manti, and welcome to a new episode of the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast. With me today is Jordan Smith, owner of Royal River Botanicals in Maine. Thank you very much for joining me today, Jordan.
Thanks for having me.
All right, before we get started, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You can also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach me at David@Cannabis Equipment News with email the podcast in the subject line. You can also subscribe to our daily newsletter. Make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. Jordan, I always like to start with a little bit of background. So what was it that brought you to the cannabis industry?
It was a passion that I had from a really young age. I think I started smoking cannabis when I was maybe 14. I ended up going to school while I was still in high school. I went to school for botany and horticulture. Got into the horticulture side of the business. Eventually, those were back in the black market days or traditional market days. I was involved in that capacity for quite some time, and then eventually our Maine launched their medical program. Well, it was launched in 1996 or 1999, but actually launched in such a way where there was an affirmative defense for patients and caregivers. Before that, it was very iffy. You could still get arrested as a patient or a caregiver because there wasn't any real designation forms or medical cards to speak of. So around 2010, my wife and I became caregivers. We've been operating in the medical market since then. Back then, it was really a small group of people. We were only able to help 5 patients at a time. We weren't able to actually sell product. It was more of like you could get remuneration for your service to grow those people's plants for them. So it's kind of at the heart of the medical program in Maine. In a lot of ways, a lot of things have changed, but that the medical industry in Maine was built upon the backs of the people who were doing that in the beginning.
So what was it? One thing that we hear a lot is that it's hard to get legacy people that operated in the legacy market into the illegal side of the business. So did you have any apprehension at first, or what was it where you were just like, you know what, we're going to strike out and try doing the legal medical marijuana path?
So I had some legal troubles probably around 10 years previous to the medical program actually having those affirmative defenses. And I'd been out of the industry for several years at a hardscape company, and also did a lot of sculpture, other artwork. So when the program started in a way that was something that you could actually navigate, I was excited to get back into it, and I jumped right back into it. Both feet, got involved in the politics of it. Spent a lot of time at the Capitol trying to help create a program that was equitable and fair, and had a low hurdle of entry that was really inclusive. So that's something that I'm still trying to maintain for people, especially the people that have been in it since that time. A lot of them are really getting pushed out by much larger operators, and now we've got multi-state operators moving in. And since 2016, we've had the adult use program, and that's been a lot of butting heads with these really business minded organizations versus these people who are like truly passionate about cannabis. Um, so there was a bit of parting ways in the industry when adult use came online. Some people operate in both markets, but there's a lot of like one or the other going on. So I'm a big defender of these really small growers who we wouldn't have either of these programs without. And that's one of the reasons I had first reached out to you, was kind of based on some of the stuff that was said, and I wanted to bring some more context to the testing side of things, and what that really means and what it means to different people.
No, I understand that. I definitely want to get into the testing as well, but I'd like to learn a little bit more about your business when you were starting out. What was it like with those first 5 patients? Like, could you believe, like, hey, we're treating people with cannabis, and could you believe that was actually happening?
It was a little bit surreal in the beginning, and I think everybody kind of was like looking over their shoulder, especially those of us that operated in the traditional market before. Um, and I know there were instances like we had patients that were still harassed by police, even though they had their medical card, and the police. I recall even to one of our patients, he's like, "Oh, I have my medical card," and the cop's like, "Well, I don't believe in that," and like, we're still going to write you up for it, and so it was an interesting time, because there was still, a lot of people that were really stuck in that, like, cannabis is really bad, and people that are involved in cannabis are bad, and people that use cannabis are bad. And there's, I think that's still the case to some degree, but a lot less so at this point. But it was an interesting time, that transition, the early years of the transition from illegal to legal, and like all those overlapping things. And we were really restricted again, like with the 5 patients, we could only grow a very small number of plants. And it wasn't something that someone could really make a big business out of in any way. It was almost something that you had to do on the side. I mean, prices were like, the product itself was more valuable back then, which helped. But it was, a lot of the people that got into it were doing it out of a sense of compassion for the people that really needed it. And we were really happy and fulfilled to be able to help those people.
Have you always been Royal River Botanicals? Is it was that the name of the original company?
No, well, when we first started, we were Connoisseur Compassion. That was never like officially incorporated or anything, but in 2016 we incorporated as Royal River. And kind of it kind of happened out of necessity, because we started to build this reputation just as caregivers, and didn't really have a business name to speak of. And there in Maine, we live on the Royal River, the house we live on now and the house we lived on before this. And also, when I was really young, I used to grow, like guerrilla outdoor grow along the Royal River, which ran through the center of the town I grew up in. So that name, it's a throwback to that, but it's also, there's like 80 companies with the name Royal River in their name, in the like surrounding towns that we live in. So it was almost like I didn't really want to stick out. I wanted to do something that was just kind of almost intentionally boring for the name of the company, just
Yeah.
so it kind of fit in.
Yeah, you don't want to draw like unnecessary scrutiny, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, we didn't want like weed in the name or like greenness or whatever, and that those are all fine. I don't have a problem with anybody's branding or what they want to do. But yeah, that's kind of where that came from. Um,
What do
so
you
yeah,
guys
we
do at the
just
company?
so we have a fairly small grow operation. There's 27 flowering lights. Um, we have maybe 40 something varieties that we work with. We kind of cycle through those. We have a handful that we're like have been really well known for um, since
What?
we started in 2010, and so those we still do quite a bit of each of those, and then we'll do a larger variety. You know, like we're often doing multiple strains at a time in each flower room just to have that variety and having that here, like um, in this market, it's really important now to have new things to offer people and to have variety to offer people to keep them coming back, as opposed to, in the past, you could get away with, growing just one kind or two kinds, and it would all, it would all be pre-sold, and um, it's a lot easier in some ways. But yeah, now we've had to adapt um, to having a bigger offering just to keep people engaged because there's so much competition.
What are the handful of strains that you're known for?
So we have this kosher kush cut uh, from seed from DNA genetics from 2011. That's by far our most popular strain that we grow. We used to grow a lot of sour diesel, uh, but it takes so much longer than a lot of the other stuff we do. We've cut back on that quite a bit. And the kosher it's very sour and skunky. It's like a lot of the things that sour diesel is, and then some. So a lot of that clientele really likes that.
At what age, when did you realize you had the gift to grow?
I'm sorry.
At what age did you realize you had the gift to grow? Just because sometimes a lot of people try in this industry, and this one in particular is pretty elusive to some people.
Um, it happened over time. Like early on, it was really this like illicit underground trade of information. So it's learning things through different people, and there was less products on the market. Like you had Fox Farm and General Hydroponics and like a couple other things. So and there was some stuff from the different forums going around. So like back then, like everybody was doing like Fox Farm or like Fox Farm with some other like worm castings and compost, and then um, uh, bat guano and all these. It was mostly organic centric, and and that was kind of the standard for a long time for a lot of people. And now, whereas now there's just like there's so many different things, and I think that um, yeah, you either have an aptitude for it or you don't. I mean, I did, like I said, I went to school for horticulture and botany. Um, Most of that didn't really apply to growing cannabis. I found out the reason I went was to learn more about growing cannabis, but a lot of it botany is like mostly learning Latin, and then horticulture um, has a lot to do with drainage and hardscaping.
Well, I've well, that's what I've heard from a lot of people that had operated in the legacy market, right? Is that there just was no, there were no universities doing studies, there were no research papers to rely on. It was mostly word of mouth, what worked previously, and how that would evolve with the next crop. How did it work for you in terms of evolving as a grower when there was a lack of information, and how have you evolved in your new professional capacity? And is there better information out there now?
Uh, no, yes and no. There's a lot more information now. I think it was a lot simpler back then because it started as a small group of people willing to take a risk and take it on. And then if you could gain the trust of those people, they'd teach you what they knew and so on and so forth. So it was like everything was bought with clout there, and like including genetics. Like you couldn't buy like, I mean, you could buy, sometimes you buy cuttings or whatever, but if you wanted like an exclusive strain, like you had to earn that by earning somebody's trust. It wasn't like go online and order. Like right now, like you go online, you can order 50 different elite cuttings of whatever, and it was completely different back then. Um, it was a lot more work as far as earning the trust of people, and then kind of like in a almost like these apprenticeship type scenarios where they'd take you under their wing and they'd show you, this is what I do and this is what I do, um, and I think there was more consistency with what those things were based on the number of people doing it and the number of products available. Um, and I think we see in some cases, like we've seen as the industry has grown, people moving away from that, like building really nice soil and trying to use the best ingredients possible to grow the best cannabis possible. Because that's like everybody was really focused on doing the best they possibly could because it was like what we're all really passionate about it. And then the more and more it became a business, and the more and more people who are interested in profit versus passion, that's where we see all these like salt-based fertilizers. I won't name brands, I don't want to alienate anybody, but I mean, they're all the same. Like if you do research on um, formulating nutrient solutions, like more or less it's the same ingredients make up the majority of salt-based fertilizers. So we saw this drift into uh, commercial horticulture-based practices, and hydroponics, and um, the highest return on investment, and we've seen the quality of the product fall because of that, and then we've seen the value of the product fall because of that, and it's been, it's a race to the bottom in a lot of cases. Some people have held true to their roots, and we still grow in soil, and we still use organic inputs and everything, and we don't really compromise on our prices. We've gone down like a little bit, but a lot of people are really gone down a lot in their pricing, and they kind of did it to themselves.
Are you able to maintain a competitive advantage with completely organic input materials? Like, is that something that you can market to stand out in the industry, or is it still right now kind of a race to the bottom?
Well, I mean, I will say we not 100% of our inputs are organic, but like for instance, we have really bad water, so we have to run on reverse osmosis water, and we have to remineralize that. And that what we use to do that is an organic. And, but the approach is the same. I'm sorry. Can you repeat
Yeah.
the
No.
question?
Yeah. So I was basically curious about growing. Is yours a premium product based on the way you're growing, and have you been able to stand out and maintain a competitive advantage while others are kind of racing to the bottom when it comes to price?
Yes, um, but it's not. That's not like a promise. Like having a product that's organic isn't a promise that you're going to maintain a higher value, because it also has to be good
Right.
and it has to be something that people enjoy and like burn clean, and it has to do all these other things. And then also having some sort of reputation helps. We've got a fairly decent reputation in the state. So I think that it it definitely helps, and it helps us, keep our prices up a little bit, but it's only a piece of the puzzle.
Mhm. So, how has the market in Maine evolved ever since you said, you had mentioned MSOs are coming into the space? Is it, in one thing we know about Maine is there seems to be more of a clear divide between the medical side and the rec side of the business. So, is the MSO's influence strictly on the recreational side, or are they starting to have a heavy influence in the medical side as well?
They lobby pretty hard against medical. Uh, a really good example is last year. I think they ended up finding out this was probably ill-advised, but there was an adult use industry group, and again, I'm not going to name like the particular businesses that were involved, but they took out an ad, and what the ad said was, Maine medical cannabis isn't tested for dangerous things like fentanyl. And as you probably know, like no cannabis is tested for fentanyl. And so it was kind of ridiculous because they're making this claim and counting on the fear of consumers to come to them. But if you were to ask them if they tested their stuff for fentanyl, obviously the answer is no. So we have these like really toxic claims being made by certain industry groups, and they're always at the Capitol. They're always lobbying to take the market share from the medical program. And up until very recently, medical has outperformed financially the adult use. And what's happened is, I mean, it's been this kind of perfect storm of falling prices and rising utility costs and propaganda and all this. And we had 3,000 caregivers last year. Now there's less than 2,000. So that's a big part of why there's been that shift as far as how much revenue they're making per year.
Mm.
So it's working on some degree. but medical still is where it's at for a lot of people, and generally you're you're not going to find the level of care and quality in the adult use market as you are in the medical market.
Is the difference because you have a personal relationship with your patients that is unrivaled in the recreational market, in your opinion?
I think that's a huge part of it. Is we've had all this time to build these relationships with customers, and um, as far as locals go, the we have the lion's share of the customers. Adult use is they're they're sucking up a lot of the tourists. A they don't have their med cards, um, so that's a huge part of it. Um, People, we do have reciprocity, so if people have their medical card in another state, they can purchase here. So those people are definitely shopping in medical, but we have yeah, I mean, time will tell what's going to happen in the future. We keep having, like that ad I mentioned with the fentanyl thing, and then we've just had this recent um, kind of media campaign with the Office of Cannabis Policy doing all this off the shelf testing, and then you know claiming um, these really high failure rates for the medical program, and then saying, just really, they just keep driving home like adult use is tested and medical isn't tested. And it's not true, because a lot of people do test in the medical program. A lot of that data is, is, it's incorrect, because what they did was they took off the shelf samples from the medical program, and they compared those numbers with self-sampled tests from adult use. So I don't know if you saw, I sent you an article before our meeting
Yeah.
about what happened in Massachusetts, and this is a great example of why these numbers are flawed, and why this data is flawed, and why it's like really inappropriate for OCP to release it. So what that study showed, because obviously other people can't see the article I just sent you, uh, they did an off-the-shelf audit of all of these products in Massachusetts, and these are all products that have already been tested by a lab. They've been approved for sale. They're on the shelf, and they found that 26% of those products ended up actually failing testing in a secret shopper campaign. So um, the what OCP did and the data they presented really wasn't apples to apples comparison. It's much it's more likely that the numbers would paint a much different picture if they did an off the shelf audit of both programs at the same time, and then compared that data.
So, and I understand that. Like, I know that Nova did a study as well with they took 1,400 medical samples and 3,200 adult use samples. And in their study, they found like almost a 21% failure rate in medical samples and only a 3.8% failure rate in adult use. So, and I mean, what's causing that kind of discrepancy, in your opinion?
Remediation, X-ray, ozone, and gamma radiation.
Yeah, and that's in the recreational side. They're
I mean, that
remediating.
3% that they're saying is like that's within the margin of error of a lot of this equipment. So it's
Yeah,
really, I find it hard to believe that the number is that low.
yeah.
Um, I I mean, I have talked to Chris Altamore a fair amount, and I think part of his intention of that statement that was taken out of context is like people are bringing their product in to actually get tested from the medical program.
Mm-hmm.
20%, um, if you account for yeast and mold failures, is not a very high rate. It's actually pretty standard,
Yeah.
depending on the procedures that they use, and that's why a lot of states, California, they switched from a total yeast and mold to using PCR to test for certain strains of Aspergillus. Some states are switching totally to a mycotoxin test. Oregon did away with total yeast and mold and Aspergillus testing. They're moving to a mycotoxin. New York they haven't eliminated the yeast and mold testing, but they have made it so there's no limit. So basically, you can have product that's 250 times what the allowable limit is here in Maine, and you can still put it on the shelf and sell it. You just have to put a sticker on it that says um, there's this much yeast and mold in here. So a lot of the data from testing that we see directly correlates to the testing procedures that are used to achieve that data. Um, and and yeah, the yeast and mold is the biggest one. And every market as it matures tends to eliminate that test from their panel because it fails so much product, and just yeast and mold fails can cause 20% plus failure rate. Um, and again, you've got these larger companies remediating their product so that they can pass this test, which is again basically it's a pointless test because it measures every yeast and every type of yeast and mold, most of which are not harmful to humans. So it's was put in there as an overabundance of caution, and it's been proven, over and over not to be a good measure of safety, and it really messes up things for especially for people like us in Maine where there's these huge apparent discrepancies, but the it doesn't actually have anything to do with the product. It has to do with the way the product is processed or tested.
Right. So, in your opinion, what does an ideal testing landscape look like for the medical program in Maine?
So uh, there are certain reasons I can't speak to this in detail because um, there's certain agendas I'm working on. This is a little complicated. So, it, in a nutshell, though, if first of all, I'll explain something, which is we're not medical's not going to have mandatory testing. It's not going to happen this year or next year. It may, and it's probably going to happen eventually. So my hope is that by the time it is mandated, if it is, that we can learn from these other states that have had to make all these adjustments in order to even keep their programs afloat. So I can say I'm very much against the mandatory testing as it stands presented by OCP because I'll tell you the biggest reason. A full adult use panel is about $600. So we've got a lot of really small operators. Um, you know, I'll try to give you like a quick example. So say like some of these people only are literally growing like 6 lights. So say they're growing 2 types under each light, which is absolutely not unheard of. There could be 4 types under each. Um, a lot of people are growing literally one plant of each variety. And the way that the AU panel is set up, which is what the director of OCP will want to see mirrored for medical. Um, you, basically, the cost of the testing is more than the value of the product for a lot of these individuals. So literally, it, if they were to mandate it the way that they're proposing, it would put all of these small growers out of business. And those are the people that started this program and whose shoulders this program was built upon. And not just the medical program, the adult use program too, because medical is what paved the way for adult use. And like, and and us in the medical program were made a lot of promises when these adult use laws came online. We were supposed to get preferential treatment. We were supposed to get the first licenses. And then we have these big companies come in and they're like, well, that's not fair. Like, we should get this, that, or the other thing. And like, we've all been just left behind, basically. Um, I mean, in retrospect, I'm glad because I'd hate to be a part of the adult use program right now. The taxes are so high that it's almost impossible to navigate unless you have 400 lights and you're using the cheapest nutrients and you're making ads about fentanyl being in medical product. And like, it's really, it's not like AU is like stoked right now either. Like, everybody's getting fucked by the Office of Cannabis Policy and by the state.
Well,
And go ahead.
no, I mean, isn't that how any industry starts? Is basically there are a small few, or there are a number of people that kind of built the foundation of the industry, but then they have to evolve as the industry grows,
Right.
or kind of fall along the wayside.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is America, and I have peers who have, like got into the adult use, and they're doing pretty well with it. I think this industry is very unique compared to a lot of other industries, but though I absolutely understand those parallels being made. Personally, I feel like concessions should be made to the people that pave the way for it, and
Were those part of the promises that you were mentioning? Like, were you promised that medical growers were going to get first right at some of those adult use licenses, and then what happened there where those promises weren't held up?
it just didn't happen, and we're not sure what happened with that specifically. I think that there was likely some sort of threat of a lawsuit or whatever from one of these larger operators saying, "Oh, well, that's not fair if you're going to give these guys first rights because like everybody should have an equal opportunity to enter the program." It's like all these like social equity programs you see pop up whenever a new AU industry comes online in different states, and then you see the MSOs come in and they're like, well, actually, we're going to sue you, and like what just happened in New York with all the card licenses. So you had people who had previous drug offenses for cannabis were actually supposed to get preferential treatment in the initial licensing for the stores. But what happened was this group of veterans decided that they were supposed to be part of this group of people who deserved to get these first licenses. But that wasn't actually what was happening. Like, they were backed by these huge MSOs, and those veterans became a vehicle for these companies to sue the state and eliminate these card licenses. And it happens everywhere because these, billionaires come in and they sue the state, or they just use all these unsavory methods to kind of take over. And again, that's capitalism, and I understand that happens, and like there's a lot of hostile takeovers in every industry. I hate to see it happen to my own, and I hate to see it happen to my friends. Like, I have friends that have lost their houses, lost their businesses, lost everything because of the way this is all played out. And it's been really hard watching my peers like fall victim to it. And I know like nobody's doing great, and they're like always trying to squeeze a little bit more out of us, and trying to basically, a lot of state agencies and individuals and AU special interests that are trying to eliminate the medical program. And unfortunately, they're doing a pretty decent job of it.
So you have absolute control over the cannabis market in Maine, adult use and medical. How do you run it?
Like, if I were in the position of OCP?
Yeah, you run the show. How do you make it so medical and adult use go to market with a safe product, and make it so it's equitable enough so that way, people can stay happy?
All right, so I would change the tax structure, eliminate the excise tax on growers, make it, I'd make it so that medical producers can sell into the adult use market. And, in that case, I think that some level of testing would be appropriate. If everything in adult use is tested, then, and you want to sell into that market, then maybe at that point be subject to testing. I think that testing in general needs to be completely revamped. The total use and mold tests need to be thrown out the window. The way a lot of the other tests are done. This again gets into another project I'm working on that I can't go into a lot of detail on, but I can tell you that there's some huge redundancies in the testing procedure, and a lot of the most expensive tests are done multiple times. In the case of batches that contain multiple strains, and that's a huge cost. I don't care which market you're in. Like, I sympathize with the AU and medical people in that regard. So making testing accessible, affordable, and making it make sense and actually represent public safety, not just a fear-based misunderstanding of what testing should be based on input from the wrong people. So I think there should be lower hurdles for people that if they want to go from medical to adult use. I don't think that should be so hard to do. I think that the track and trace, like especially metric, is a scam. Like people like I've talked to tons of people. Like it doesn't like it's another fake sense of security. Like metric doesn't actually work. It's you can cheat on metric. It's all like all the input is controlled by the people who are inputting the information.
Yeah.
So, I'd like to see it treated more like the craft beer industry, like reasonable regulations that aren't going to, put most people out of business. Um, so, yeah, in the adult use, having a flat, I like what Massachusetts is doing with like a 20% flat rate sales tax versus 10% sales. Flour plus $100 a pound for trim plus $25 a pound for fresh frozen flour. Like it's like the amount of tax is crazy. And
I'm going to stop you right there for a second. Could you start over with where you say, I like what Massachusetts is doing, because you broke up right as you said that?
so just the way they're doing, I like what Massachusetts is doing tax wise with a flat rate sales tax versus putting such a big burden on the growers with this giant amount of excise tax. I just think it makes more sense, and it because our excise tax is by weight. Like whether your pound is worth $2,000 or it's worth $500, you still have to pay $330 in excise tax. So having like a flat rate sales tax that's put on the customer, and like if prices need to adjust to make that more feasible, like, but we have that room to do that because we're not paying all these crazy other taxes. I like that model better, and we already have a 10% sales tax, so like do away with the excise tax, add a little bit to the sales tax. It's fair. It's a lot more fair for everyone, and that's what I think anyway. And
Is it
in the adult use program,
isn't part of the issue that it's kind of each state on an island trying to figure out how to run regulations?
mm-hmm.
I don't know. I'm constantly surprised how state to state the regulators can look at what's working at another state and then just kind of like change it up just a little bit, but not seemingly try to continue to improve upon what worked elsewhere. And I don't know, do you have any insight as to why regulations or why it's set up the way it is in Maine? Just because, I mean, you were there from ground zero in the industry.
So, unfortunately, not enough people. Like in some ways, like we've had a lot of people involved politically. In the beginning, we did. Recently, people are hurting so bad, like they don't have time to go to Augusta and like go to every hearing, and like, and that's been happening over the years. Like, first we're like trying to get everything established, and then everyone's like pretty complacent and they're like, well, things are pretty good, like I'm not going to bother to go up there. And then like all these regulations get snuck through by regulators and by lobbyists for AU and other special interest groups. So and now and now we're like, holy shit, like things are not going well. And people need to show up at the Capitol, and that's what needs to happen in every state. Because if you go up, I went to a hearing the other day, which is a recodification of the entire medical laws in Maine. 8 people showed up to that hearing out of the whole state. So, and it's all the committee that was there, and most of the other people that showed up, like they don't have an intimate understanding of running a cannabis business. So they're making regulations based on what they've learned from what's happening in other markets, what they're being told by lobbyists. They don't know, and they don't know any better. Like even if they have like the best intentions for the medical program or the adult use program, they don't necessarily understand it enough to make the right moves to ensure that the programs are going to be sustainable and equitable for the people involved. So like the biggest takeaway I can give from that is if you're in a state where laws are being developed and it's not like they all happen at once, like this is something that happens, it's every year things change, and every year it moves back or it moves forward or it moves sideways. And like if you don't get involved and you don't go up there, if you have something to say, like whatever these regulators think is the right thing to do is what they're going to do. So if they don't know any better, they might do the wrong shit. And that's why we have like yeast and mold testing in Maine. Like it sounds like a good idea, but it's a really bad idea. But it's nobody's fault. Well, I mean, I'm sure it's somebody's fault, but it's like it's because not enough people that actually know what they're talking about get involved. The more people from the industry that really know what needs to happen show up and speak their mind, the better any program is going to be.
So
as long as people listen to you.
Well, yeah.
So wear a suit.
How do you get more of your peers to show up, and try and make some actual change? Because it sounds like you're fearful that the medical industry in Maine, as you know it, is going to go away within the next few years. What are you doing to kind of try and rally the troops, so to speak?
Well, I'm personally I'm going to the hearings and like through my social media. We're working to try to get more people involved, and I'm always telling people, like, even if you can't go, like watch the hearings, like they stream most of the hearings, like watch it, write a letter to your representative or senator or whatever. Like they read the letters, and I mean, honestly, that's how we've stayed relevant for as long as we have, is that people have been involved. And some of those people get like too involved and they get kind of sucked into the dark side, as I like to call it, where they get pulled in to the how am I going to make money off of going up to be a lobbyist or whatever, and then you start compromising on your morals and things like that, and you end up being a mouthpiece for some of the more unsavory groups. So average people need to take part in it. And I don't think the medical program's necessarily going anywhere, unless everybody just keeps not doing anything.
No, I understand how, I guess, complacency or I guess defeat can lead to a bad trajectory in terms of the industry. I mean, one of the things for me is how early how nascent the industry is, right? There's not a lot of information out there, like we were talking about from the grow side. The University of Tennessee Institute of Agriculture, they just came out and they just said, we need to study cannabis more. We need to study how it interacts with the body. We need to study how it's grown and the methods that go on behind the scenes. Would you agree that that's part of the case too, is that for as long as it's been happening sort of behind the scenes, we haven't really put cannabis under the microscope to fully understand much about it?
I think we do too much of that
Okay.
already. I don't like these. Like, we don't need to fucking study it. Like, people have been smoking cannabis for 10,000 years. Like, we know, like, you smoke it, it does what it does. Like, we know what it does, like, to your brain. We know what it does to your body. We've got a pretty good idea. It's already out of the box. Like, we know that lung cancer and smoking kills 480,000 people in the US every year and 7 million people worldwide, 7 or 8 million worldwide a year. We know what the carcinogens are. We know what the like 4,000 different chemicals in tobacco are. We know that alcohol causes like 6 or 8 different types of cancer now. But knowing that isn't going to change. Like, we're not going to stop selling alcohol. We're not going to stop selling cigarettes. It's not going to happen. So,
True,
like, there's this assumed risk with all of these products.
True. Isn't the idea, though, that if you understand that, it might work as a natural deterrent for people that might be on the fence, you know? I mean, having that sort of information available, helps people make a more informed decision.
Sure. Yeah. I'm not fully opposed to it. I just think there's too much. I think there's still a lot of propaganda attached to it. And I think that a lot of these studies end up getting funded by like the NHIA and like, or what is it? Whatever, National Highway Safety Institute, and then like the NIDA, the National Institute for Drug Abuse. And they're looking for certain information when they're funding these studies. And they're not looking for non-objective information. Like, they want whoever's doing the study to say, like, we need to stop this cannabis from spreading or whatever. So I think that there are some good like public outreach programs and public education programs happening regarding cannabis, and I think that if you were to look at the data, youth use of cannabis is kind of dropping off. Like, the more adults get into it and like it becomes more mainstream, like, it's not something to do to be defiant if it's something that's accepted by society. So they're going to go on to something else, hopefully not like other drugs or whatever. But I think that I think those studies can be good, but can be bad.
No, and I definitely think it's important to, at least there's more. It seems like there's more oversight as to whether or not those studies and where they've received their funding. Studies, when they publish a paper, they say where they've received funding from, if it's come from anywhere, outside of the school or academic institution. And I think it's important that you look at that type of information so you can kind of decide what kind of lens you're going to look at that information under.
Right.
When it comes to testing, So do you think, have you heard of like the trust in testing certification? ACT and SC Labs kind of came out with like universal testing standards for cannabis. And it would be up to the labs to kind of get this certification. But do you feel like as long as labs were all playing by the same rule, every lab that would even the playing field a little bit?
Well, there's ISO standards and there's the AOSCA, or there's another group. And then there's the CDC too, also certifies certain procedures. I think that having standards between all the labs throughout the country would be a huge step forward in testing. Do I think that's gonna happen soon? It's unlikely, but we're seeing it like in California. They're making an effort. I think that's what you were talking about, where they've had a lot of issues with lab shopping and like inflated THC results. You know, you got people like 40 something percent THC, and like basically there's labs you can walk in there and they're like, what do you want us to put for a percent of THC on there? And like, you know, whatever you want. And like the people who have more money get to decide more what their package says. So the having those standards is incredibly important, and it's going to eliminate lab shopping a lot, and it's going to increase public safety a lot because you won't be able to buy a clean test. But it also falls back on like what procedures are approved or required, and what that means. Because, you know, say they were to require the tempo method nationwide to measure total use in mold, and that basically automatically fails 20% of all product in the country, that's not a good thing. But if they can come up with better standards that better represent actual public safety, and they can make those standard, then that's great.
You had mentioned remediation earlier. So are you opposed to remediation? Are you opposed to all remediation efforts?
Yes.
Yeah. Is there a particular reason why you're against remediation efforts? I mean, if you want to use X-ray, for example, X-ray has been used in the food industry for a long time. How come you're against remediating cannabis?
I think it's dishonest. I think that you should. I mean, I guess, you know, I guess it's on a case by case basis.
So you're saying if it's remediated product, it should be labeled
if you've
as
got
remediated
something
product.
that's 300,000 CFU aspergillus and it's literally garbage, it's garbage. Like, you shouldn't be able to remediate that, so it's technically not containing that many CFU. If you've got something, so I guess, you know, so say for instance in a state where they're doing TYM, total use in mold, and that's a requirement, and everything else about the product is great, but you're failing a test that's stupid, and the only way to get it to pass is to use remediation, then I suppose, you know, I can see how it could be useful, but it's literally the only reason you end up needing to do it is because of poor standards in testing. Like if it's actually dangerous, um, like you lose, you throw it out. If it's if it's uh, if it's failing because of a ill-advised testing procedure, then I guess it's appropriate. But it's also, again, I just don't think. I think it sucks that you would have to do that. Um, so, and I understand, like it's used in other industries all the time. I think at least it should be something that's put on the package so you know that it's been remediated. Um, I think people deserve to know that, and especially stuff that's remediated with ozone is like really gross. It looks gross, it tastes gross, it smells gross. It's the absolutely the cheapest way to do it. I mean, you're talking it's $200,000 for X-ray remediation machine that can do like 5 pounds at a time. Gamma radiation, it's radioactive, so it's very expensive and and it's risky and like they use in Canada, and they have to have literally armed guards guarding the facility where they do the remediation. So yeah, I mean, I guess I'm for it in certain circumstances, but I think that it's too often used as a way to just like take crap and make it pass testing when it's crap.
Gotcha. Well, isn't that the biggest issue with testing is that, um, you know, you wind up, I mean, you try to do anything that you can to save a crop because and we hear it from a lot of people in the industry. Every grower like is kind of just getting by, living crop to crop. If they lose one, the business goes under.
Yep. I don't know. I've thrown away a fair amount of crops. Not,
And you've
it's
survived.
not fun.
Yeah.
Barely. I
Well,
don't have
Jordan,
200 grand for X-ray remediation machine either.
um, I know that we've taken a lot of your time, Jordan. I do really appreciate you taking the time. Before we get out of here, is there anything else that you want to make sure the Cannabis Equipment News audience either knows about Royal River Botanicals, yourself, or things in Maine?
I think it comes back to, I mean, my two biggest things that I want to convey to everyone is that testing is incredibly subjective, and that if you don't understand the science and what procedures are being used, you can't understand if the product's actually safe or not. And and to that point, like just because something is tested and it's on a shelf somewhere, it doesn't mean that it's safe, which doesn't build consumer confidence, but it is what it is. Like it can pass testing and then end up not passing testing later. Um, so learn, if it's something you care about and if it's something you're to base your purchase on, maybe look into what your state's testing requirements are, and see I guess if you have a total yeast and mold requirement, understand that it's just a bad test. And it comes down, my belief is you're better off getting your product from a farmer that you know personally and trust, if you have that luxury. And that's one of the great things about Maine, is like we have these relationships with our patients, and we're small. It's only 1 million people in the whole state, so like a lot of people literally know the people whose flower they're smoking personally, and that's the best way to get the safest product, in my opinion. I think testing is secondary to that.
Well, I understand that. I understand that, because when it comes to purchasing food, I feel like if I have a personal relationship with the farmer, I feel better about that product because I know how they've raised or grown that product. Did you find were any of your customers coming to you with questions about some of this testing after, some of these reports started coming out about discrepancies with pesticides and mold between medical and rec?
So we're almost entirely wholesale. So, and then the few customers that we sell direct to are like, they're really great customers. They know, like, we're not going to do them dirty or whatever. But a lot of the people who I know who have stores, there has been fallout because of that. And there's been a big drop in consumer confidence because of it. And that's one of the reasons I'm here today, is to try to like re-bolster that consumer confidence, because it's just like not necessarily the right information going around about this.
No. Well, understandable. And again, thank you very much for taking the time. And, as things change in Maine and as you evolve at Royal River Botanicals, please keep in touch. We'd love to hear more about your story and see how things are progressing.
Thanks. And then the last thing I want to say is definitely, whether you're a cannabis business, potential cannabis business, cannabis consumer, cannabis enthusiast, like, get involved in your local government and let them know like what you want, what you want things to look like. Because if you don't tell them, somebody else is going to tell them what they want, and they're going to do that.
I think that is an excellent point as well. And even, I'm in Wisconsin. I'm in a completely prohibition state, and it's important to keep that message coming across, because people do surveys and they understand that there's X amount of consumer confidence or demand for legalization, but you need to fight for the industry you want, and you need to shape it so that way you can have it in the way you want it.
For sure.
All right. Well, again, Jordan, thank you very much for the insight. I really do appreciate it, and I hope we get a chance to do it again soon.
Likewise.
Well, before we get out of here, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You can also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com with email the podcast in the subject line. You can also subscribe to our daily newsletter. Make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. For Jordan Smith, owner of Royal River Botanicals in Maine, I'm David Banty. This is the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast, and we'll see you next week.